Welcome again, everyone. Today is March 4th. Exactly 1 year ago today, UCLA closed the campus on account of the COVID-19 pandemic. UCSB followed suit a few days later. And I just thought it would be a nice thing on this 1 year anniversary. All of you have been going to classes and sacrificing so much for the last year. I thought it would be a nice thing to have a very, very special guest speaker today. I'll introduce him momentarily. I also want to indicate that we're very pleased. I'm very honored to be joined today by our chair in the Global Studies Department, Professor Mike Thies of UCLA, our chair of the UC Santa Barbara History Department, Professor Erica Rappaport, along with Chair Marty Gillens of the UCLA Luskin School Public Policy Department, and Chair Meredith Phillips of the UCLA Undergraduate Public Affairs Program at the Luskin School. Okay, everyone, here we go. Without further ado, our guest today is the Honorable Adam Schiff, representing California's 28th Congressional District, covering Burbank, Glendale, Pasadena. Congressman Schiff, now in his 11th term, 20 years plus serving his district in the Congress. He is the chair of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, and of course, was the lead investigator and lead House manager or prosecutor in last year's first impeachment trial of former President Trump. I'm going to take down my slides, and it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to all of you Representative Adam Schiff. Thank you so much. The congressman will be with us until about 10:30. He has to leave for another appointment. All of you, please stay on. We'll have a good discussion for the remaining 15 minutes. Congressman Schiff, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, please.
Well, Steve, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to speak to your class and your students. And I'm going to refrain from telling lots of stories about you, which I could, as you know, from our days together in the U.S. Attorney's Office. But really a treat to have a chance to catch up with you and look forward to the discussion today. I thought I would just make some brief remarks to set some context for the discussion. It's hard for me to believe that it's only been a year since the first impeachment trial. This year, like so many, really, I guess, of the last several years, has been characterized by a very different concept of time. I found time during the Trump administration was often far longer than it seemed, and events that seemed like they happened a month or a year ago happened the day before. But the pandemic also, I think, has really warped our sense of time. Nevertheless, what we were confronting a year ago was a president who had serially abused the powers of his office. And most significantly, culminating at that time in the effort to coerce an ally, Ukraine, that's at war with an adversary, Russia, to coerce them into helping him effectively cheat in the election by withholding hundreds of millions of dollars in military aid. This was, at that time, the most serious presidential abuse that we were aware of. We had been investigating his contacts with Russia, his obstruction of the investigation by the special counsel. But this was, I think, of a whole new order of magnitude. I had resisted impeaching the president over his Russia misconduct. And I was concerned that the lesson that he would learn from an unsuccessful impeachment over Russia might embolden him. But what changed my mind about the necessity ultimately of using that remedy is the fact that it was the day after Bob Mueller testified, the day after essentially Donald Trump believed he escaped accountability for his Russia-related misconduct, that he was on the phone with President Zelensky of Ukraine, trying to shake down the Ukrainian leader to help him cheat in the election. And so if the president learned a lesson from escaping accountability for his obstruction of justice, among other things, in the Russia investigation, it was exactly the wrong lesson. It was that he could act with impunity. So there we were in trial, making the case a year ago. And much like what would take place a year later in the more recent impeachment trial, the evidence was overwhelming, which was, a remarkable feat considering the president had ordered everyone in the administration to stonewall all of our subpoenas and to refuse to testify. Now, there were a number of brave career public servants who did. Marie Yovanovitch, Ambassador Yovanovitch, was the first. And she was followed by other, great patriotic Americans like Bill Taylor, among others, who told the story of the president's abuse of power and did so at considerable peril to their careers. And we warned that if the senators found Donald Trump guilty, but nonetheless refused to convict, that we had to expect he would do it again, and perhaps in worse ways. The senators at that time, and I think Lamar Alexander spoke for many of them when he went on one of the Sunday shows to try to explain why he refused to allow us to call witnesses during the trial, by saying the House had proved its case 5 ways. Did we really need them to prove it 6 different ways? This was not unlike what we would hear a year later with Mitch McConnell after voting to acquit, when he took to the Senate floor to talk about just how guilty the president was. And essentially an argument that almost said impeachment was too good for him. He needed to be criminally prosecuted. The two actions were not unrelated, the first trial and the second. Because senators refused to hold the president accountable in the first trial, when they had to know, as we argued at the time, that it would be an encouragement to his further abuse of power. They helped set and train the events that took place over the year ahead. Interestingly, during the first trial, the senators that wanted to vote to acquit made the argument that they should let the voters decide. And ultimately, when the voters did decide, those same senators, most of them, didn't accept the decision of the voters and supported decertifying the results. I was asked recently about the remedy of impeachment now after this second unsuccessful trial. Is the remedy essentially an anachronistic vestige of the Constitution that has no utility anymore? Is it an unusable, unworkable remedy? And my feeling is the answer is no. There's nothing wrong with the remedy of impeachment. If we were right in the Constitution today, we could probably not improve upon what the founders wrote. It's not a remedy that we would want to be able to invoke with a majority vote in both houses. That would turn us into a parliament where you could essentially do away with the chief executive anytime the majority changed. It should be a high standard. It is a high standard. The problem, though, is not with the remedy. The problem is with us. The problem is that at least in one party, thankfully not in the other, but at least in one party, the commitment to the person of the president, in this case, Donald Trump, outweighed everything else. Outweighed duty, outweighed Constitution, outweighed oath, outweighed the good of the country. And that's what had our democracy trembling over the last 4 years. It wasn't Donald Trump's conduct alone, but the fact that so many members of Congress were willing to go along with it, willing to support it. And indeed, the president's big lie about the election, which led to the insurrection on the 6th of January, was carried by so many members of Congress. And one final thought I'll share with you, because it really struck me at the time. After the insurrection, many members went to airports to fly home. I ended up staying in Washington that weekend. And you may have seen footage of them being accosted by the insurrectionists in the airports, like my colleague Lou Correa from Orange County. And as I watched them, I thought to myself, those are true believers. They really believe the election was stolen. They really believe that Donald Trump won, that somehow, that Donald Trump won in a landslide, and the election has been taken away from him and from them. My colleagues in the House and Senate, they don't believe that for a minute. They know it's a lie. And too many of them have been willing to push that lie. And this, to me, is the reason why we've been in crisis. And there are a lot of reasons for why we got to where we are, which I look forward to discussing. But there is no constitutional fix. There is no statutory fix, although I've got a package of pro-democracy reforms that I look forward to telling you about. Nothing ultimately can take the place of people living up to their oaths and putting country beyond party or any other consideration. So thanks for inviting me. Look forward to our discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Schiff, for those incredibly interesting and important words that you shared with us. As I said in the chat to all the students, please raise your blue hand if you want to be recognized, and I'll just go down the list in the order in which the questions came up. Why don't we just, because I think that Representative Schiff would be interested, when you ask your question, if you could begin by just say your name, your hometown, and what your major is, and whether you're UCLA or UCSB. Adrian, I'll start with you.
Oh, hi, Congressman Schiff. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. I'm a fourth year at UCSB, and I'm from Bakersfield. I just had a question. I might be paraphrasing here, but I remember in your closing argument, you said something along the lines that if right doesn't matter and if the truth doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter how good the framers were or how good the Constitution is. And in light of everything that's happened since then with the second impeachment and the fact that Trump wasn't convicted, but there were more Republican votes, does that give you hope as far as that, truth and right will prevail? Or do you think we're at an inflection point where we need to decide really quickly where we're going to go?
Oh, thank you. It's a really interesting question. And first of all, I want to tell you that my wife is also a gaucho, so she salutes you. Interestingly, after the first trial, when Mitt Romney announced his verdict, and I did not see it coming. There were a very limited number of Republicans who had an open mind in that first trial. There were 4. And as I would discuss with the other managers, we were making our arguments to the 4 and the 40 million, the 4 senators with an open mind and the 40 million Americans out of over 300 million who still had an open mind. But when Mitt Romney announced his verdict and why he convicted, it restored a lot of my faith in the founders' optimism, in their belief that we didn't need to be ruled by a despot. We could rule ourselves. We had sufficient virtue to rule ourselves. So I felt uplifted after that trial, notwithstanding the verdicts of the others. Even though there were more Republicans that voted to convict, I have to say I didn't feel quite as optimistic after the second trial. Maybe because the second offense, the incitement of insurrection, was yet again another order of magnitude worse than the abuse for which he was previously impeached. Maybe because the senators themselves lived through it. In the trial we had a year ago, we had to try to get the senators to put themselves in the shoes of Ukrainian soldiers on the front lines with their colleagues dying every day, worried about getting military aid, and their president being under pressure to announce a bogus investigation into Joe Biden. It didn't require any imagination for those senators to think about the insurrection. They were there. We were all there. And so, I have to say that I hoped for a brief window of time after the insurrection that was a big enough and bad enough event for the Republican Party to shake itself of this cult, to decide to separate themselves from Donald Trump. And it wasn't. And I think part of the reason why the result of the second trial was not uplifting at all is the fact that because the Republican leadership now continues to be tied to him, it means that the lies will go on. The Republican Party will continue to be a broken party, not grounded in ideas or ideology, but just devoted to a single person, a very flawed person. And our system really requires two functional parties, and we don't have that. And by the shape of things, we won't have that for another 4 years. If he continues to try to be the kingmaker, and I have to think that he has the view that nobody is as good as him, nobody can do it right like him, and he isn't going to want anyone else to be president. If he can't be president, certainly not going to want Marco Rubio or any of these other people to be president. So we could have to deal with another 4 years of this. And so I have to say that leaves me more pessimistic than I would like to be, and shows you that we have some hard struggles still ahead of us.
Your comment, Representative Schiff, reminds me, we were joking with both classes after the insurrection, when there was a little bit of talk about it, invoking the 25th Amendment for a few days after January 6th. I was taking the students in both these classes through Section 4 of the 25th Amendment and commenting on the requirement of a determination by a majority of the cabinet and the vice president that the president was, quote, unable to carry out the powers and duties of the office. And then upon that determination, the president would have 4 days to respond. And I was predicting that if this were to occur, the response from former President Trump would be, what do you mean unable? I'm the most able person in the history of humanity to carry out this office. So anyway, Ben, over to you.
Thank you, Professor. Hello, my name is Ben. I'm a third year at UC Santa Barbara. I'm a history major, and I'm originally from the Valley, Tarzana in Los Angeles. And the one question that I had for you, Congressman, is you say there was overwhelming evidence in during both impeachment trials against the former president. But if there was overwhelming evidence, why do you think it didn't succeed? And also another question I have is, do you think that his recent subpoena for his tax returns in New York will finally get him?
In terms of why it didn't succeed in the face of overwhelming evidence, I think the reason is a combination of fear and ambition. For the Republican senators, given the stranglehold that Donald Trump has on the base of their party, senators were afraid that if they voted to convict, that they would be challenged in a primary and they would lose. And if you look at what's happened to Liz Cheney since she voted for impeachment in the House, and she's the third ranking Republican, other Republican members of Congress are going to her district to campaign against her. And the president at the CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Convention, spelled them out by name, every House and Senate member who voted to impeach him, to bring about retribution. I have to say, it reminds me, and I find it very amusing, that during the first trial, there was a CBS report that came out that quoted a Republican insider saying that Republicans know that if they vote to convict the president, that their heads will be on a pike. And I made reference to this article during the trial, and there was just great umbrage by Republicans. No, that couldn't possibly be true. How could you suggest such a thing? And of course, that's exactly what's going on right now. And exactly what happened to Mitt Romney after his verdict in the first trial. So fear is the predominant answer, but also ambition. For Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and others, they want to be president, and they feel they can't antagonize that huge part of the Republican Party that's behind Donald Trump. For those in either category, who are too afraid or too ambitious to do the right thing, I don't know why they ran for office in the first place. I mean, if you're not going to do the right thing when the country needs you, then why are you even there? I understand it at one level, and another level, it's absolutely inexplicable to me. In terms of the tax returns, and will that finally result in action against Donald Trump? I don't know. I think that based on the public reporting, which is all I can go on, there are probably any number of very serious legal issues about his taxes, about representations he made to different banks to get loans. And I think there's a high likelihood of liability for Trump Corporation. Whether they will be able to follow the chain enough to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the president's personal criminal liability, I don't know. Quite separate and apart, though, from the tax issue, the president has been all but indicted in the Southern District of New York under the name of Individual One in a campaign fraud scheme involving Michael Cohen and the payment of hush money. And I just can't help but think when I look back on this, Donald Trump was writing hush money checks in the Oval Office to silence people talking about an affair with a porn star. And this is the person that the Republican Party is completely devoted to, lock, stock, and barrel. Can you imagine if Barack Obama did anything like that? That alone they would have impeached Barack Obama on. But in any event, the Southern District of New York, the Justice Department, they're going to have to decide, do they go forward with that case? The reason they didn't was Mueller believed, and Bill Barr would do anything essentially the president wanted up until the very end, that the president couldn't be indicted while in office. Well, he's no longer in office. And the Justice Department made the argument that Michael Cohen needed to go to jail for that scheme. And in that indictment, it says that individual number one is the one who directed and coordinated the scheme. So what's the argument that the guy who is coordinated and is directed needs to go to jail, but the guy who does the coordinating and does the direction gets a pass? So that's an issue I think already teed up for the Justice Department to have to decide.
Thank you so much. We've got 14 hands up. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. David, you're next.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Representative Schiff, for joining us today. My name is David. I'm a third-year history major at UCSB, originally from El Segundo, California. My question is, to what extent do you believe conspiracy has infiltrated partisan politics, specifically with QAnon and the Republican Party, and as you mentioned earlier, the cult of Trump? And how much do you think that has an influence on what actually goes on Capitol Hill day to day?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I like your virtual background too. But tell me, is that just because you don't want to clean your room, or are you just really?
Not made, no.
There's no doubt that there is a segment of the Republican base that has been embraced by the party, which are adherents to QAnon, including one of the new members of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who up until her election was posting stuff about Jews directing space lasers to start wildfires, and suggesting that Sandy Hook, among others, the Parkland shooting, were hoaxes. And those conspiracy theories and a bunch of others have wide currency. And of course, they're dangerous. There's a conspiracy theory out there right now that the coronavirus vaccines have a microchip in them as part of a Bill Gates conspiracy. And I did a town hall with constituents, and I had a Kaiser head of medicine on, and I asked him about, what kind of vaccine misinformation is going around. And he had to, he says, I'm glad you asked, because I'd like to debunk several of the theories out there. There's a theory that the vaccines will make you impotent. There's a theory, and then he went into the microchip theory. And I said, it's really sad that you have to debunk that. But the reality is there are a lot of people who believe that now. And obviously this is terrible for the country. But when those people occupy positions of power, it's just downright scary. You know, some of these members have advocated violence against members of Congress, and now they're in Congress. So you have both the problem of the propagation of these conspiracy theories, the degree to which they're given legitimacy by people who are in responsible positions adhering to them. But you also have the Trump effect of people adopting Trump-like tactics and using the same kind of rudeness, incivility, personal attack, lies, and smears that have been Donald Trump's calling card. So people like Matt Gaetz, you know, they mimic everything that Donald Trump does because it gives them a big base. You know, he's a nothing of a member of Congress. As a legislator, he's a complete zero. Nobody would even know who he is, except that he has made himself known by being the most loud, belligerent, and obnoxious Trump supporter. And so it has definitely had an effect on the institution by spawning copycats. And that's the last thing we need.
Great. Thank you so much. Great question, and thank you for the answer. Frank, you're next.
Good morning, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Frank. I'm a history major, 4th year from UCSB, originally from Cupertino, California. My question is kind of revolving around the same basic idea as the last one of conspiracy theories, more broadly about the, how do I say, different foundation of facts that much of the Republican base, and specifically the Trump base, rest a lot of their cases on. I mean, obviously we've seen a number of conspiracy theories, a number of blatant untruths that have driven so much of these ideas, and especially the insurrection on the 6th. Do you believe there's anything that the country can do to create a, I don't know, to address this I believe, this most serious problem of just different sets of facts being the serving as the foundation of the two parties' beliefs? And if so, where do you believe the problem lies? Do you believe it lies in the bad faith representatives or in the media, or is it a more deep problem? Thank you.
Well, thank you. A great question. Yeah, I've always felt that there was nothing more dangerous to a democracy than the idea that there's no truth. And over the last 4 years, there's been a real assault on the truth. It began with, you know, Sean Spicer lying about the size of the inauguration crowd. You know, something that seems so trivial as to be absurd. But of course, other lies followed, and then they came up with a justification for the lies. Kellyanne Conway said they're entitled to their own alternate facts. And then you had Rudy Giuliani saying the truth isn't truth. It was really the first anti-truth administration. And a lot of what the country's been through that culminated in January 6th, I think, is the result of a perfect storm of events. You know, certainly having the wrong person in the wrong place was a lot of it, but it's also the evolution of how we get our information. You know, back when I was in college, I remember rushing back to my dormitory to watch Walter Cronkite's last broadcast. That was a time when there were basically 3 networks. There was a large body of agreed upon fact. Walter Cronkite was among the most respected, if not the most respected person in the country. And we could disagree on what to do with facts, but we at least agreed they were facts. In the 90s, we moved to a model of cable news where people would tune into the news they wanted to hear. And in the 2000s, we moved to a model where people didn't choose the news chose them through algorithms on social media. The technology companies would curate the information you see. And had a conversation with Mark Zuckerberg recently about a report I had seen that more than half of those who go down extremist rabbit holes on social media do so because it's recommended by Facebook's own algorithms. Now, that's obviously not done deliberately at one level. It's not deliberate. Facebook and Twitter and these other platforms, they want you to spend more time on their platform. So they show you what you want to see, and they know a lot about you to figure that out. They know what you share and don't share, what you like and don't like. They know where you live and how old you are, your ethnicity and your gender. And the result is that we live in these information bubbles. And it's really hard to talk to people and to break through the bubble. What do we do about this? Well, there may be some governmental answers, and we're looking at the immunity that the technology companies enjoy, Section 230. That was designed when they were these small nascent industries, and we want to make sure nothing we did would curb their innovation. They're now the behemoths, so they don't really need the protection. But also we wanted to encourage them to moderate their content. Unlike the government, which under the First Amendment can't tell people what they can say or not say, private companies get to choose their policies, what they want to see on their platforms. And we didn't want them to be sued if they were acting responsibly and taking down things that were injurious to the public. Well, if they're not going to exercise that immunity, wisely or at all, then they shouldn't have the immunity. Or we should at least narrow the immunity such that if they continue to amplify for engagement, meaning send people down rabbit holes, then they don't enjoy the immunity anymore. But a lot of this is going to be beyond the reach of the government. It's going to fall on the individuals. And here, I think we can take a lesson from Norway. Norway's had to deal with Russian propaganda for a long time, and they've developed a curriculum that begins when kids are very young to teach Norwegians how to be good consumers of information, how to recognize the truth, and how to sift out propaganda, and how to learn things online and know trusted sources, how to be skeptical of what they read, and they have proved to be much more impervious to Russian propaganda than other nations in the region. And it's not just, of course, Russian propaganda. We've got very domestic propaganda we need to deal with all the QAnon stuff and other misinformation out there. So we're going to have to learn how to be consumers of information again. We're going to have to learn how to break down these information bubbles and stovepipes. I think that what's made that challenging is that this information revolution happens so quickly. Other innovations like television or radio, or if you go back centuries, the printing press, we had a long time to get used to those innovations. Comparatively, this has happened overnight, and we still haven't figured out how to deal with it. But I do think that revolution in social media has contributed to a lot of this anger, fear, polarization, vitriol, and we're going to need to figure it out.
Thank you so much. Bill Tamborelli, you're next.
Hi, thank you, Congressman Schiff, for being here. Again, it's truly an honor. My name is Bill. I'm a third-year History of Public Policy and Law major at UC Santa Barbara, and I'm originally from the Napa Valley. And my question is kind of piggybacking off of the last two. It has to do with elections. And I'm just wondering, because there's so many people who still believe that the election was stolen, it was a lie, that Donald Trump won by a massive landslide, I guess it's just how do you reestablish like the legitimacy of American elections in the face of that, in the face of these conspiracy theories and rampant misinformation?
Another good question. I'll tell you what is so remarkable to me about what I hear from my GOP colleagues. They spend weeks amplifying the president's lie about the election. They spend weeks saying it was rigged and it was illegal and blah, blah, blah. And then they say, well, we have to investigate this, or we have to respond to this. because our constituents are concerned there was fraud in the election. Yeah, they're concerned because you've been telling them that. You've been lying to them about it, and they're believing your lies. And now you're using your own, propagation of this stuff as some kind of a justification for why you're voting to decertify the election results. It's that kind of, transparently circular reasoning that we've been dealing with. I lie, people believe it, therefore I need to respond to the lies that people believe. And what do you do about that? Well, when there are enough people willing to go along with it, it's very difficult. If there's only one party telling the truth, then the truth becomes a partisan issue. And I'm encouraged, I guess, and this gets back to an earlier question. I'm encouraged by the fact that there have been a growing number of voices, if not in Congress, at least around the country, of people pushing back against these lies. There were enough, obviously, to decide the election in the first place. And I'm hoping and praying that one of the underlying contributors to this assault on the truth, besides the advent and nature of social media, has been the economic disruption and the fears accompanying the pandemic. During a pandemic, conspiracies, and this is historically the case, not just the case right now. During a pandemic, conspiracies take flight. And there are probably a lot of psychological and sociological reasons why that is the case. But I think people's fear and anxiety about their financial stability, about their health, contributes to wanting to look for simple answers. And sometimes the simplest answer is a lie. When the economy does improve, when we're able to go back to life as it is, then these angry, often xenophobic lies of the former president and his supporters will have less salience. And so I'm hopeful that over time, we can get back to a place where there's a respect for the truth, and we can continue to disagree with what to do with the facts, what policies should spring, what conclusions we should arrive at based on the facts, but we can get back to agreeing on facts. It's really going to be essential, I think, for the future health of our democracy. So I hope that conditions will change that will be less suitable to these lies, less fertile ground for these lies. And then in the meantime, it falls on us in positions of responsibility and the press to not fatigue of having to fight the big lie. And I give the press a lot of credit. The press have been in a very difficult position. If they call the president a liar, the former president a liar, then they're viewed as biased. If they call out members of Congress for lying, then they're viewed as biased. And if the liars are particularly in one party or the other, then it's even more subject to the claim of bias. But a responsible press has no choice but to call out the liars. And I salute them for doing so in the midst of enormous pressure.
Thank you. I'm going to go just a smidge out of order in the interest of university diversity. Samantha Tubner, you're next.
Hi.
Yeah, the gauchos are much quicker to the draw and raising their hands than the Bruins. What's going on here?
I will represent the Bruins. My name's Samantha. I'm UCLA, third year. I'm a global studies major. And something you said earlier kind of stood out to me, that the people who rioted at the Capitol really truly believe that the election was stolen, while people in the House and the Senate really don't believe that. So that sort of division in mindsets is fascinating to me, and something that I've seen in the past few years that has been surprising is sort of people saying that the president should be above all, should be above the law, and so on. And that as American citizens, it's our duty to support the president, no matter who it is, and no matter what they do. So I was wondering if you ever see those mindsets reflected in Congress and reflected in politicians, or if that's another area where it really diverges.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And it brings to mind a couple of things. In terms of my colleagues in the GOP knowing the falsity of their claims and arguments, one of the most obvious logic flaws, if you can call it that, in what the Republicans were arguing is they were saying that the ballots in certain states, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera, needed to be thrown out or decertified because there were flawed processes or fraud in the votes. These arguments were being made by Republicans from those very states. And so you might ask the question, well, then should we throw out your own election because you were elected on the same ballot? And of course, they had no answer for that because there is no answer for that, except it's a lie. The whole thing is a lie. Don't ask me to be consistent in my lies. There just isn't, a rational answer to that. So why do they do it? And what does it mean in terms of any ideology about whether the president is above the law, or does the president, like Donald Trump once claimed, get to do anything he wants under Article 2? I can just tell you that so many of these colleagues of mine, when there was a Democrat in the Oval Office, were very strong believers in a check on executive power. They were outraged by the comparatively smallish use of executive authority by Barack Obama compared to the expansive use of Donald Trump. At one of the key milestones where I knew we were in desperate trouble as an institution is when the president took money for the military and used it to build the wall. Now, I say that because of all the powers that Congress has, the most important is the power of the purse. And I had kind of an internal debate whether our most important power is the power of the purse, or was it the power to declare war? And ultimately, I decided the power of the purse was the most important, because at the end of the day, you can defund a war. And you can declare or not declare, and many presidents have gone to war without it being declared by Congress. But Congress can stop a war by refusing to fund it. And so it all comes down to the money at the end of the day. Well, when the Republicans in Congress decided that they would look the other way, or worse, they would vote the other way when it came to asserting its own power of the purse, it would let the president usurp that power, that they would, if they wouldn't defend their own institution, then they would never defend it. And, there were 2 articles of impeachment in the first trial. Both were really important. One got all the attention because it was the sexier of the 2, involving Ukraine and war and military funding and coercion and cheating. The other was obstruction of Congress. The fact that the president said, I'm just not going to respond to any subpoenas, stonewall all the subpoenas. If you allow a president to do that, and the Republicans did, you have essentially made Congress a completely toothless power, because you can never do oversight of the executive. The executive can then be as corrupt as they want if they know that they don't have to answer questions from Congress. This gets me to a package of reforms I mentioned at the outside called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which would expedite the enforcement of congressional subpoenas. It would stiffen penalties for violating the Hatch Act, a law meant to prohibit a president from dragooning federal employees into working on their campaign or federal resources. It would curb abuse of the pardon power. It would provide enforcement for the emoluments clause, and a host of other remedies in probably the most comprehensive reform package since Watergate. That package will be a good test of whether Republicans believe a president is above the law or not. I would hope that now that Trump is out of office, that package would have some more support, because Republicans aren't going to want Joe Biden to do any of the kind of things that Donald Trump did. But I suspect that they will still largely not support the package if they fear that it will be too direct a criticism of Donald Trump and he will be upset with them. But that will be another test of their devotion to our institution and our system of checks and balances, or whether they're just locked in their support for Donald Trump.
Right. So we've got about no more than 10 minutes left. Let's take Daniel's question. We might have time for one more. I'm sorry we can't get to all of you. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Representative Schiff, for being here. My name is Daniel. I'm a fourth-year History of Public Policy and Law major at UCSB. And so 74 million Americans voted for Trump in this past election. And I like to think that politicians still tangentially represent their constituents. And so do you think that language and rhetoric, which clumps all Trump supporters together or all Republican supporters together, irrespective of kind of the awful things that Trump did, can serve to hurt democracy moving forward and can almost have ramifications, not necessarily in solidly blue districts, but in purple districts moving forward?
I do. I would agree with you. I try to distinguish between Republicans in Congress, which are one breed of GOP, and Republicans out in the country. If you look, for example, at the American Rescue Package that is now before the Senate, it got, I think, not a single term. I think it may have not gotten a single Republican vote in the House. There are any number of Republican governors and Republican mayors throughout the country who support this package. I think 70 to 80% of the public, including a lot of Republicans, support that package. And so the GOP leadership in Congress is very different than the GOP membership. Now, it's certainly true that a lot of the GOP membership is devoted to Donald Trump, but not all of it. And they're devoted to Donald Trump for different reasons. I think there were four categories of people who supported Donald Trump originally. There were the Republican voters who are reflexively Republican voters. They will vote for anyone with an R next to their name. And there are lots of Democrats who are the same way. The description in my parents' generation was a yellow dog Democrat. Yellow dog Democrat would rather vote for a yellow dog than vote Republican. And so you have large numbers of members of both parties who are just completely devoted to the party. You also had people who voted for Donald Trump who answered to the dog whistles of bigotry. And I fear that's a bigger group than I would have thought or hoped. Seeing the Confederate flags and Auschwitz T-shirts among the insurrectionists show you that there is that vein within the Trump supporters. But there's also two other categories beyond the reflexively GOP voters and beyond those answering the dog whistles of bigotry. One was a group that I think is no longer with him, and that was people who voted for him because they thought he would drain the swamp, that this rich New York billionaire, beholden to no one, might do something that others wouldn't to clean up government. Well, he turned whatever swamp there was into a cesspool. But the last remaining group, and this is, I think, the group that is the most subject to persuasion, which we really need to win over. And I think Joe Biden did, but we need to be even more competitive. And that's the group of Americans that voted for Donald Trump because they'd worked hard their entire life. They had nothing set aside for their retirement. The future for their kids looked even more bleak. The kids were in debt going to school, and there were no jobs for them when they got out of school. They felt like they'd played by the rules and done everything they were supposed to do and had nothing to show for it at the end of the day. And they were willing to go with either the guy promising a revolution, in which case Bernie Sanders, or with the guy promising to break everything, and that was Donald Trump. And that group of Americans that Trump, I think, very shrewdly called the forgotten Americans. That's a very important group of people. And I think we should make every effort to win them back to the Democratic Party. And I think the argument and the case that we make is a powerful one, because nothing Donald Trump did or was even intended to help them. One of the reasons I'm a Democrat is that it is the party of working people. It is the party of people struggling to get ahead. But there are a lot of people who are working people and struggling to get ahead that don't realize the Democratic Party is their party. And I think it's on us to make the case why that's so. So I think you're right. We don't lump all people who voted for Trump in the same place. We don't lump all Republicans together. I was raised by a Democratic father and Republican mother who taught my brother and I that neither party had a monopoly on good judgment all the time. And I think we need to keep that humility in mind.
Representative Schiff, you've been extremely generous with your time. Do we have an opportunity to squeeze in one more question?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. Yandan, over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Schiff, for talking to us. My name is Yonda. I'm a third-year global studies major at UCLA. I'm originally from the San Fernando Valley, which is Brad Sherman's district. And I had a really quick question. Since I'm global studies, I'm interested in different politics in different countries. And what I noticed that in Europe, especially, a lot of the conservative parties do lean a lot more left than what we're used to. And I was thinking, since you said that Republicans do have a broken politics, do you ever see our Republican Party, in order to gain more voters, to be more broader, moving a little bit to the left, or is it most likely it's going in the opposite direction? It's moving a bit to the right, and it seems to tug on the Democratic Party to the right as well?
It's a good question. I have to say that I was surprised over the last 4 years that Donald Trump never made an effort to expand his base. And that's very unusual. I think prior presidents of both parties were elected with a certain base of people, and they looked to broaden that base when they got into office. And so, George W. Bush, he looked to try to expand his base. He was the compassionate conservative. He was a supporter of immigration reform. But Donald Trump made the decision that he was going to go with those who brought him to the party, and basically everybody else was going to be an adversary. It is remarkable that he got as many votes as he did with that strategy. And so I think a lot of Republican Party leadership believe that that strategy has now been vindicated. And they're going to continue to go down that path. Now, there are a lot of people who don't believe that's wise, who are, the more mainstream institutionalists within the GOP, the George Wills and the Bill Kristols, the Liz Cheneys and the Adam Kinsingers, the Mitt Romneys, but they are very much a minority in the Republican Party right now. Now, they're not an insignificant minority. It's 15 to 20% of the Republican Party. This is another reason why I felt, a strong degree of pessimism after the second trial. And that is that there's no sign of the fever breaking. And the fact that McConnell has been brought into line, McCarthy had a pang of conscience for all of about 5 minutes. And then he was down to Mar-a-Lago making his tribute to the great one. And Mitch McConnell was asked recently, if Donald Trump becomes the nominee, will you support him? And his answer was, of course. Now think about that. Of course, I'm going to support the guy that I said should probably be prosecuted. Or of course, I'm going to support the guy who I said was responsible for the insurrection. Now, and I'm obviously characterizing his words here, but it wasn't too far from that. And so I don't see in the near term the GOP deciding to broaden its embrace. What it may try to do is it may try to appeal to conservatives within minority communities and try to broaden their base that way, not by moderating their policies, but by better micro-targeting conservatives within minority communities. So I think they had success with that. That's why part of the reason why they got to 74 million. If I had to guess, that will be the strategy, at least until Trump is no longer on the scene.
Well, it's 27 minutes after the hour. I know that you have another engagement at the bottom of the hour. Congressman Schiff, Representative Schiff, Chairman Schiff, thank you so much for your generosity in taking time to speak to our UCSB and UCLA students today. And guys, you know, isn't it amazing to hear from one of the top political leaders in the country expressing thoughtful, mature, wise, and well-considered sentiments? Isn't it refreshing and isn't it wonderful as we think about what the future may hold in store for us as long as we have leaders like Adam Schiff in the United States House of Representatives? Thank you so much, Congressman. I'll just leave it to you for any parting words with us before you have to go.
Steve, thank you very much for the kind comments. It really has been a pleasure, and I appreciate the questions, which were just terrific. You know, I guess I would just say to any of you that might be interested in politics as a career yourself, that we need you. We need good people to be engaged. One of the things that I'm pleased and reassured about over the last 4 years is I was afraid that all the ugliness would turn young people away. They wouldn't want anything to do with political process, but it's been quite the opposite. And we have young people running for all kinds of different offices now, engaging more in politics than ever before. And to deal with so many of these systemic problems, whether it's systemic racism or it's climate or it's assaults on our democracy or on freedom of the press, you know, the passion and salutary impatience that young people bring is so important. So I hope if you're one of those who's interested, you pursue it. I feel very fortunate that I did and have this opportunity. So thank you very much, Steve. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully we can have you back next year and we'll talk about some national security issues as well next time. Thank you so much. Be well. Thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you. Take care now, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Well, that I hope was really inspiring and interesting. I'm so sorry that we couldn't get to all of your questions, but this is pretty typical. The congressman, and he's been to my house a few times to have meetings with small groups here in Santa Barbara. And before that, when I lived in Princeton, New Jersey, I had some events for him in Washington. Known him for 35 years. We sat next to each other in the U.S. Attorney's office. And the way he answered the questions is I mean, that's him. Very careful in his choice of words, very thoughtful, very scholarly. He went to Harvard Law School. The famous professor Larry Tribe at Harvard to this day puts Congressman Schiff in the top 5 all-time Harvard Law students he ever taught, which is pretty amazing if you look at all the Harvard Law grads and what they're doing around the country. And it was really, really very kind of him. And we didn't know for sure until yesterday morning that he was going to be able to make it today, which is why I was so tight-lipped about revealing that it was going to be him, because I didn't want to disappoint you all. Let me just ask if any of our department chairs are still with us. Professor Thies, Professor Gillens, Professor Rappaport, if any of you would like to make any comments based on what we just heard, I think it'd be very, very interesting to hear from any of you. If you want to just unmute, any of you? Professor Thies, Professor Gillens, Professor Rappaport, don't be shy.
Okay, I can. Hi, everybody. Well, I just want to thank you, actually, Steve, for arranging that. That was like made my week, but also your questions were so thoughtful. And I know you weren't prepared. That was what was so amazing to me, because I knew this was a surprise, but just fantastic questions. And I love the perspective from the global studies students there at UCLA. Hi. As well as our, history students and history of public policy and law. So just, I really appreciated it and found that really helpful. But thank you. This is the great thing about Zoom. It's the one thing that we can enjoy, that get together in this way. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah, he was sitting in his home in Potomac,
Yeah.
Maryland, zooming in
Yeah.
from across the country. Really amazing. Thank you, Professor. Let me just invite Professor Gillens or Professor Thies, if either of them have any comments. I don't know if they're still on. I haven't checked the participant list. I'll just wait a second if either of them want to unmute. Okay, I do see a couple of hands up, and if that indicates that you still have something to say, Vanessa, I'll go to you first.
Oh, I hadn't taken it down, but he did touch on part of it, like the 4 types of voter that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was one of the questions that I was going to bring about. But I was also going to add in the which would probably fall into the Republican diehard voters, would be the right-wing conservative Christians that also are following him, even though he doesn't live that lifestyle.
Yep.
So that was kind of an interesting thing. But one of the things that I wanted to question him about was how much he thought that President Trump, he spent his life kind of gathering information on these people and infiltrating these circles. So I just wondered how much of that is a part of why people are not going against him. Like, how much information does he have on them? Is that even a consideration?
You mean is Trump holding some ace cards in his pocket? He's got dirt on people, and yeah. There's been a lot of speculation about that, but I'm sure that he has dirt on some people. When you travel in those circles, inevitably you will. Of course, there was, a lot in the media about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, but all of that is sort of, fodder for conspiracy theories and for script writers for movies. I'm not sure how much of that turns out to be true in the real world.
Right. I just wondered how that plays into the psychology of these Trump supporters, these diehard Trump supporters.
Yeah. I'm not sure it does, quite frankly. I think they support him because of exactly what Congressman Schiff said, that he really struck a chord with them. They're people that have, in their minds, done everything asked of them, worked their jobs, raised their kids, paid their taxes, and they end up at the end of the day with nothing to show for it. And they're frustrated and they want change, whether it's the kind of change that Bernie Sanders promises or the kind of change that Donald Trump promises, revolution or breaking everything, as the congressman said. They want change. They're fed up. And that's really the core, I think, of the appeal of Donald Trump. I just had a note in the chat that our guest speaker at UCLA from last week, who was kind enough to join us today, Alan Brumberger, was trying to say something. Alan, are you trying to intervene here? Go ahead.
Yes, I would love to, first of all, I mean, it was really just marvelous to listen to him, knowing that he wasn't on the news and he could just be relaxed. And I agree with the statement you made. I thank God that my kids and grandkids will benefit from his service. I would have loved to have asked him 2 things. One was his views on the fact that many of these far-right representatives and senators represent a constituency, and that constituency put them there. And maybe it's the result of gerrymandering. And I would just love to have had his comments on gerrymandering and the impact on one man, one vote. And the other thing I would have asked him was, the students last week asked me, did I think that anyone had learned anything from the crises we lived through in 2008 and even now in terms of bank financial community performance? And I said, no. And I said, I thought the reason was that nobody paid the penalty. And same thing happens with our politicians. I mean, really, they don't pay a penalty for much of what they do.
Yep.
So I would love to have had his comments on that. That's all. I'd love to hear yours on that too someday, Professor.
Okay, well, I'll just say 2 things. On the second point, people in DC love to say, I'm accountable. and nobody knows what that means. And of course, there are never any true consequences. But on your first point, on gerrymandering and voting rights, those of you at UCSB who were with me last quarter in 142 will remember our discussion of the Shelby County case, in which Chief Justice Roberts a few years ago wrote the majority opinion for the court, in which the court said that the preclearance requirements that had been enacted as part of the Voting Rights Act of 1964, which required Southern states that had traditionally suppressed the Black vote, that those preclearance requirements were no longer necessary because circumstances had changed in those states between 1964 and 2013-14 when the case was decided. And so those states were now free to redraw their districts, to gerrymander away without the necessity that the Voting Rights Act imposed upon them to bring those proposed changes to the Justice Department for approval first. And look what's happened in the intervening years. We've seen North Carolina and Georgia. Most recently, we had this argument this week about Arizona. And voting rights and voter suppression, here we are in the year 2021. The 15th Amendment, which guaranteed equal voting rights, which was ratified in 1870, 151 years ago, has still not been fully implemented in this country. And it is a very, very, very serious problem. It is a very insidious way to disenfranchise through lack of representation, minority and disadvantaged communities. And hopefully, I don't think anytime soon, because of the composition of the Supreme Court and the way this argument went the other day, but you never know, we may be surprised, and we will see what happens. Now, Tristan is putting in the chat, yes, there is recent voting rights legislation. We'll see what happens when that gets to the Senate, though, because there are some very, very centrist/conservative Democrats in the Senate, way more so than in the House, who are quite powerful. We saw one of them just flex his muscles last week, Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who said that he would not vote to confirm President Biden's nominee for the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, and she withdrew a couple of days ago because she had no chance of clearing the confirmation hurdle, the necessary majority vote. So very important and very interesting question, Alan. Thank you so much for that. Vanessa, I see your hand up, but I thought I had a couple of other people first. Yeah, Merritt, you were up before. Go ahead, please. Marit.
It's Marit, just to keep you extra confused. So I just had an interesting conversation. I think it's interesting because I was part of it. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about kind of these dual goals all politicians seem to have in a country where, you know, there's term limits, where on one hand, you know, you might absolutely be the most genuine, like, I want to change the world, I care about my constituents, I'm a super smart person, and you might have excuse me, and if you are, you probably have all of these things you want to get done, but on the flip side, you need to be elected to do that, and even beyond that, you have to have a certain level of relative power in the legislative body to get the things done that you want to get done. And I'm just wondering if that's an kind of unresolvable contrast, because it seems like a lot of the time, you know, you can't be in power without, you know, being, you know, in the swamp, right? But then, and I don't know, I think it's a contrast to the whole power corrupts concept, because I don't know if power corrupts so much as, you know, it's just the system is inherently made for, I don't know, some weird middle ground where you can't just be an idealist, if that makes any sense.
Mart, thank you, first of all. Second of all, sorry for not pronouncing your name correctly.
All good.
No, but I apologize. And I would mention, I still don't know if we have Professor Gillens from UCLA. I think he may have had to go to another meeting, but he recently published a book called, you remember the Alexis de Tocqueville famous book from the 1820s, 30s, Democracy in America. Well, Professor Gillens just published a book called Democracy in America, ? And it really, I wish he were here because I think that he would find your question extraordinarily interesting and would hold forth on it for all of us to benefit from his knowledge. It is a really, really important and interesting dilemma that you raise. And I would just offer one comment, which is that we have to do something about the role of money in politics in this country. The congressman said that everything kind of comes down to money in terms of the congressional power of the purse, the ability to defund war if they don't like a war. Well, there was a famous politician in California in the 1960s, Jesse Unruh, who made a comment about money and its relationship to politics, which was very true at the time and is even more true now. We need to do something about the presence of money in politics, because if you can pay, you get to play. That's the way it works. And next quarter at UCLA, in one of the classes I'm teaching, we're going to spend an entire week talking about lobbying in Washington, D.C., and how so many of the lobbyists used to work on the Hill. They have cushy relationships up there. I mentioned a couple of fundraisers that I've held. I've held 5 fundraisers for Congressman Schiff during his 20 years in Congress, so that's like one every 4 years. I've raised a lot of money for him. We were friends before anyway, and he's not the kind of person who would ever say, if you don't raise money for me, I won't come on your Zoom and talk to your class. He would never say that, but you'd be surprised how many people would say that. You'd be surprised how many politicians, if you go to Washington, D.C., and you want to meet a politician to talk about an issue of importance to you, how many of them would not even give you the time of day if you didn't show up on their donor list in a big way. So I just want to commend you for your comment, Marit, and just to add this very, very, very disheartening and yet truthful comment about the role of money in politics. We've got to do something about it. Okay, well, we are a minute away from the end. Let me see if anybody else has a hand up. Okay, I don't see any. So let me just make a couple of administrative announcements. For those of you who are gauchos, office hours will begin a half hour late today at 1:30, not 1 o'clock. I have something I need to do, and I'll be tied up at 1, so I'll see you at 1:30, those of you who can come. For all of you, UCSB and UCLA, thank you so much. Your questions, and I want to echo Chair Rappaport, your questions were fantastic, especially that you didn't have time to prepare. You had no idea who the speaker was, although I will say Fez did guess it yesterday in the chat. Lucky guess, Fez, lucky guess. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. We've got the last week of the quarter coming up. Amazing, hard to believe. Week 10 is next week. We are just flying toward the end of the quarter. For both UCLA and UCSB, I've got a lot of good stuff planned for both your classes next week. In the meantime, have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you all so very, very much. And take to heart what the congressman said. If any of you are thinking about a career in public service or politics, go for it, because we need you. Thank you all. Have a great weekend. Oh, Professor Rappaport, your hand is up. Did you want to say something?
Just wanted to thank you again, and thanks for everybody for coming. Yeah, good luck with the last week of class, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Professor.
Thank you.
Professor.
Thank you,
Take care, everyone.
Professor.
Bye, guys.